within the state, not statewide, is actually the wording. And so that gives them discretion to actually, areas if they feel they have concerns with out-of-compliance septic tanks, to focus on that and not make necessarily rules. So I think that was a real important point. Also, there's a big push instead of a regulatory process to make it a system of standards, to where you don't add the regulatory process, because it was brought up by many of the speakers and many from local government that, we have a pretty good set of regulations already in our environmental health division. So it was very well attended. There was 2 sessions. I went to the evening session, and it was, one of the points that I brought up as far as to talk about, why do we want clean water? Well, it's for not only for people but our fish, and we need more fish. If you read the article yesterday in the Press Democrat, it talked about the fisheries in the Russian River, and it was just a side note to the article that, maybe one of the problems with the fish is the mouth at the Russian River is completely blocked off with gravel. So no matter what you do upland in the Russian River, it's blocked off. The fish can't come, the salmon steelhead can't come up it. And if you remember this summer, or this fall when we was our meeting in Wallala, you could look out the window from where we was having lunch and see the same thing at the Wallala River. So that's 2 rivers right there that I've physically seen that, no wonder there's no fish. They're being, but yet a state agency, Fish and Game, won't allow anybody to go take care of that impediment to allow the fish to come up here. But yet we're penalized because there's no fish. That's 2 of our main rivers that I know of that I've physically seen in this county this fall are blocked off totally from having salmon and steelhead come up and spawn. But yet we're still paying for, or being penalized for a tougher regulatory process. So anyways, that's Supervisor Brown.
Well, I was going to add some comment, but it's probably better that I don't, because it could get into a very long conversation about whether there's water to support fish coming upstream in the first place and being able to spawn. So it's quite complex.
Another point, too, we were just distributed by the CEO's office on a budget workshop coming up in 2 weeks. So if there's any board members that have special interests or anything, certainly get a hold of the CEO's office so they could be prepared of what board members want on this budget presentation. So it gives the CEO's office a little heads up of some of the requests that board members want. Okay. Sure.
Mr. Chair, I don't know if Supervisor Smith, there was one other item on General Government Standing Committee, would like to report on. We had a gentleman speak during public comment, came back at the last board meeting concerning Social Security COLA raises and how that impacts our seniors for other programs. Supervisor Smith, would you?
Sure, yes, that's a good point. We continued that discussion that began here in board chambers with respect to advocacy that the county could possibly do to support cost of living issues for seniors, those on limited incomes that might get small incremental raises that would then disqualify them for other public benefits, such as in particular housing. So we talked about this in the committee. We had work from our Health and Human Services Agency looking into what federal legislation, because usually those numbers are driven by federal agencies with respect to the economic guidelines for various benefits. So we took a look at those. They're going to track the legislation, and they are working on a more enhanced resolution that this body could discuss and potentially adopt to support those general concepts. So I believe that will get back to us sometime in March. We'll be able to look at a resolution here, talk about it, and if the board so chooses, to go forward and support. Basically, I think pushing our federal representatives, and probably to a lesser degree also some state representatives, on what they can do with respect to income guidelines and be aware of how those guidelines are interrelated and how they could hopefully address the various calculations that folks go through with social security and housing guidelines, and making sure that one increase doesn't disadvantage them in another arena. So we're going to be taking a look at that. It's a standing item with respect to the General Government Committee. We'll continue to look at it, but it's going to come back to this full body for a discussion and a vote.
Thank you, Supervisor Smith. Okay, with that, we're going to move to agenda item 10, boards and announcements of appointments of boards and commissions. But, and then after that, we're going to have a presentation from the emergency services. And then we got a couple of public comments we'll do before we go on. We're going to take a 5-minute break. Okay, so appointments to boards and commissions. Supervisor McCowen.
Mr. Chair, I will move appointment of the recommendations for the Workforce Investment Board as presented by staff.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for Workforce Investment Board. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I have a number of appointment sheets out for different First District appointments that have not returned, so I'm hoping next week to work very strongly on that, to get them back in and do appointments. However, I look at the list of appointments to boards and commissions, and I think that it would be a very, very good idea to go over these different appointments. Certainly, the Workforce Investment Board is an active body. We need to clean up this list. I've watched board agendas for years, and the Commission on the Status of Women, 12 individuals. It's been on there for I don't know how long. We need to investigate whether these should stay on here or be dissolved. So anyway, that's my recommendation. I'd like to hear from other supervisors.
Well, actually, Supervisor Brown, about less than 2 years ago, we did review that. And what you run into is most of them, these are mandated by law that you have to have them. So we can do that again, but I don't think there's been a significant change.
Then I would like
We
that
can just-
report uncovered so Supervisor McCowen and myself could look at that. And when we talk about legislative matters, maybe that is a legislative matter that needs to be changed.
Okay.
And maybe that's an issue to take to CSAC.
Okay, well, then we can direct the clerk of the board to do a review and come back and report.
Okay, I appreciate that very much, and I think Supervisor McCowen would as well.
Well, and I do concur with Supervisor Brown. I think we should have the discussion. It's kind of misleading to have the appointments on here meeting after meeting when in the case of at least one commission, apparently that commission hasn't met for some time. There's no plans for it to meet. So, you know, it's a little confusing, I think, to hold out that we're in the process of soliciting members for this committee. Another one that I think could bear some discussion is the Building Appeals Board. I started looking into that a little bit to get some information on it before trying to find people who would be willing to serve. And although there's a need for that board to meet, when there's a need for it, that board hasn't met since sometime in the 1990s. And so I think some of this bears discussion about how much of this really needs to stay on here on an ongoing basis, and is there a different way to approach some of it. For instance, the Building Appeals Board, if the City of Ukiah and the City of Willits have a similar situation where their boards aren't that active, or maybe there's the occasional case that comes forward, perhaps it's allowable to have the jurisdictions cooperate to have one Building Appeals Board. And this mainly deals with what types of materials are acceptable. It gets to an interpretation of the code, and so someone can appeal the ruling of the building official. But I think we need to try and look at, is there a better way to manage some of this? So therefore, I agree it should be on the agenda. Thank you.
Okay, we have a comment on this